Hello, and welcome back to JC's Writing Advice. I am JC Bybee, indie author and writer coach, and part-time YouTuber. I do videos about the process of writing and how to write. Well, how to write better, how to improve. And I also have 10 books in print. You can find them on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other retailers. They're in print and ebook. And you can find all of my books and my mentoring services at jcbybee.com. You can also go to Patreon, where you can support me, where you can help me buy a chair that doesn't squeak really loud every time I move. Anyway, so for today's lecture, we're going to continue on a topic that I brought up in my world building lecture, talking about language and the use of language in writing. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Get everything going. So, language. Why is language important? Well, picture a world where there isn't a shared language at all. Like, nobody speaks the same language. Is anything going to happen? Is anything going to get done? Is progress going to be made? The answer is no. So, the basics of language, it provides communication, preservation, and progress. That's how I'm breaking it down. Obviously, there are many ways to look at it, but this is the approach I'm taking. Now, communication of ideas, needs, and wants. Ideas such as what to eat, where to go, what to read, what to write. Language forms the basis of how we interact with other people. And as somebody who speaks two languages, the ability to switch from English to Spanish gives me an advantage in some situations because I can help people in two separate languages. And I can sort of fake it in a couple of others because of the Latin roots. So it's very frustrating to not be able to properly convey your ideas, your needs, and your wants because people don't understand you, because they speak a different language, or you're speaking a different level of the language. And we'll get to that. Because languages have levels. And one of the things you can consider when you're writing is what level of language do your characters use? And we'll talk more about that toward the end of the presentation, or the end of the video. You can tell I'm used to giving presentations at conferences. So, talking about preservation, we're talking about preservation of self, family, society, and the world. The preservation of self is pretty straightforward. If you can communicate your needs, then you can keep yourself safe. Preservation of family goes along the same lines. If you're able to understand the needs of your family, then you can help them survive. One of the most difficult things as a new parent, I remember this, was trying to understand the needs of a baby when their basic means of communication is crying at one volume or another. That's it. So it made understanding their needs very difficult. And I had to pay attention to when was the last time I fed them? When was the last time they were changed? Have they had their naps? All of these things are about preservation, and the ability to communicate makes that possible, makes that easier. And society is where we really get into the complications of language. The preservation of society is dependent upon people being able to communicate problems. If there is a problem and we don't have the words necessary to tell other people to get the help that we need, the problem can't be solved. It's probably one of the biggest hindrances to how do I want to word this? To compromise. There we go. One of the biggest hindrances to compromise is how people use language, how people use words, and some people's desires to change the meaning of words to fit what they want rather than to fit what society wants or society has agreed upon. So, when you are using language in your books and your writing, you need to understand how do the people that you are interacting with, whether it's in a modern setting set on Earth or a fantasy setting or a science fiction setting, you need to understand how the language that you are using can communicate to other people and how difficult it can be when there's not a shared language. And then we go on to progress. Progress is the ability of a society to advance. Individuals and a society, I should say. So progress is everything that we've talked about already on top of improvement of self, family, and society. Progress is taking ideas beyond just the needs of survival, and how do we go from surviving to thriving. You can talk about modern advent of refrigeration, for example, and what that did for the preservation of society. You could look at the idea of antibiotics, advances in medicine, advances in transportation, and how our society has evolved and changed and grown and progressed because we were able to, and occasionally it happened by accident, communicate ideas. People were able to look at a problem, find a solution, and effectively communicate that solution to other people and to the rest of society, thus improving the state of everyone. And yeah, I know it seems like I have my my reference at the bottom of the screen. Leads to the next topic, because progress does lead to the next topic, and understanding how language is built upon itself from the basics of needs and wants and desires to improvement gets us to our advanced concepts. Using language. So how do we use language? What do I mean by that? Each way we write, when we write, how we write, can convey ideas. So, can convey class. Do you have a class structure in your society, or do you have a perceived class structure in your society? Are you trying to send a message about class structures in your writing? Careful with putting messages and meaning beyond. But, so, the noble class, this is always just the base example I use. Does the noble class speak differently than the common class? And does the common class speak differently than the working class? Or the merchant class? Or, do you have magic users or alchemists or soldiers? Did they use their language differently? And how does that stratify society? And how can that potentially raise conflict? And when I say conflict, I don't necessarily mean fights. I don't mean the literal definition of conflict, but tension in a scene can be put in there because of linguistic misunderstanding, because a worker at the docks might use a word differently than a noble, or not use words that a noble would use. And the noble has more words, but they don't understand, let's say, the subtleties of the working class, because they have fewer words, and so they use them differently. You can convey all of this simply through how you use the dialogue. And also, depending on who your narrator is. Are you in first person? Are you in third person? Those are the two I use. I use first and third person. There are others. I don't write in those, so I'm not an expert in those. But If you are in your POV character's head, how they think about a situation, how they view the situation will influence how you write and narrate what's going on. On top of that, you have education. One of the things that has stratified society for generations is the level of education. Some people have access to more, some people don't. So we go back to talking about how that class can stratify, so can education. The ability to understand concepts beyond the basics of needs, wants, day-to-day necessities. So education will change how you speak. It will change how a character views the world. One of the examples I can think of is in Hero Unit, my first series. I've taken a word that is a common word, normal, and I've taken another word that's less common, exceptional. And I have applied them to two groups of people. Exceptionals are those with superpowers, or metahumans as they're sort of broadly categorized across fiction. And then normals are people without superpowers. And because they have been around, exceptionals have existed long enough, these two words, normal and exceptional, have changed in how society uses them. People don't usually say normal anymore unless they're referring to non-exceptionals. So when I'm writing in Hero Unit, I have to make sure that I use the word normal differently. And it's a small change, it's a subtle change, but it's a change because how we use words conveys ideas to our readers. Another one that I just came across in my current work in progress, a YA fantasy or Victorian-esque fantasy. There are two entities. You have the spirits of the dead and you have spirits. And I have had to change from saying spirits when I'm referring to the disembodied souls of the dead. So I'm not getting confused between the other spirits that are metaphysical representations of concepts or ideas, or in this case, sort of some of your traditional sort of, how do I want to say it? The four element principles that are very prevalent in fantasy. So spirits represent that. Souls represent the spirits of the dead. And I had to make sure that I had that correct. So I had to do a find and replace. It was not fun. So if you're going to make these changes and make these steps, make sure that you have them written down. Make sure you understand how you want to do it so it's consistent throughout. And so your editor, whoever that may be, can say, okay, we need to make sure we're catching all of these because we don't want to have any points of confusion. So another way that language changes is with religious beliefs. I am a religious person. I have been a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints my whole life. I use language slightly differently than somebody who is not a member of my faith. And I know that people of other Christian denominations use language slightly differently. And so there can be confusion when there's not I don't know, words just left me. I have a bit of a headache, so that happens. When you don't set sort of ground rules of communication between different faiths, different beliefs, it can really happen when you step outside of Christianity into other faiths, Islam, even Judaism. There can be communications that are lost and ideas that don't translate well because we don't use words in exactly the same way. And some people might disagree, and that's fine. This is from my experience. So if you were going to use religion in your books, and I encourage you to at least explore the idea, You need to understand how religion changes the way people speak. A great example for me, actually, is like I said, religious person. I grew up reading the Bible and the Book of Mormon, and it's written in an older dialect of English. And one of the words they use is towards. And in our modern day and age, in the United States, we don't use towards, we use toward more commonly. Something that I didn't really think about much, but when I started looking at it, I noticed that there is a difference. So it's even something as simple as that can influence how people speak and interact. And then you can use language to communicate biases, prejudices, and things like that, because how people speak about, let's say you have different races, like let's say you have elves, or let's say you have dwarves, and you want to preserve that sort of trope in fantasy that elves and dwarves don't get along. How do elves refer to dwarves, and how do dwarves refer to elves? Do you want the dwarves to come across as rude, so they always refer to elves as knife ears? It's a common one I've seen. Do you want to have elves come across as seemingly superior, so they don't use vulgar terms when they're speaking to dwarves? They just simply call them dwarves and refuse to use names or anything. They simply refer to them as dwarf. Things like that. It's a really easy way to add layers to your writing, to convey ideas, to help people understand long-standing feuds potentially between nations, between families, between races, between worlds, if you're going sci-fi. All of these ideas are conveyed through language. How do they speak? How do they speak with somebody who is superior to them in societal rankings? You know, how do they speak to somebody who is equal? How do they speak to somebody who is supposedly inferior? These are things that you need to take into consideration as you're working and as you're writing. Now, do you have to stress over this? No, you don't. These are concepts and ideas that I'm giving to you, the listener, the watcher, to help you further develop your writing. If right now all you're trying to do is get your first draft done, great, get your first draft done. Then we can go back through and look for these little places where you can add in the layers of dialogue and belief and language and everything to enrich your book, enrich your story, enrich your world. Even if that's our world, even if you're writing a police procedural set in, New York, they talk differently in New York than they do in Los Angeles. They talk differently in Los Angeles than they do here in my tiny podunk town in the middle in western Idaho. So when you are writing, you need to make sure that you're keeping these ideas in mind, not for your outline, not for your first draft, but for your revisions, for your subsequent drafts, your subsequent books. So that way it becomes second nature to you, and you can develop the ideas as you go along. All right. Well, thank you for stopping by and giving this video a watch. I appreciate any feedback that you might have. If you have comments, please feel free to leave them down below. If you have questions about writing that you'd like me to address or talk about, please feel free to put them in the comments. Also, if you are an aspiring writer and would like some help, think you need a little bit more of a push, I have my writer or author mentoring or book coach or writing coach, however you want to look at it. You can go to my website and look under writing mentor, or author mentor, I believe is how I have it, or writing coach, and we can maybe set up a meeting where I can talk you through some of this stuff. And I thank you for listening. Please, like I said, like, share, subscribe. If you don't like what I talked about, leave it a dislike. And I thank you for stopping by. and hope you have a great day.